The golden light of dusk spilled through the dirty windows of the Lucky Strike Saloon, catching on the sequins of Hope Garrison's dress as she twirled across the small wooden stage, her feet aching but her smile never faltering. It was 1873 in Hangtown, California, a mining settlement that had earned its grim name during the gold rush days when desperados met swift justice at the end of a rope. Hope had been dancing here for 8 months now, ever since her father's death had left her penniless and alone in a town that showed little mercy to women without means. The men whistled and hollered as she moved to the tinny sounds of the piano. Coins occasionally clattered onto the stage, nickels and pennies mostly, rarely anything silver. It was barely enough to keep her room at the boarding house and put food in her belly, but it was all she had. "Give us another, darlin'," shouted a red-faced miner, slamming his empty whiskey glass on the table. Hope nodded, forcing another smile as she signaled to Barney at the piano to start the next song. Her golden brown hair was coming loose from its pins, and sweat trickled down her back beneath the cheap satin dress. At 22, she had already learned that beauty was currency in a place like this, but it was a rapidly depreciating one. She didn't notice the stranger at first. He sat in the corner, nursing a single glass of whiskey, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a dust-covered Stetson. Unlike the others, he wasn't calling out or leering. He just watched with an intensity that made Hope increasingly self-conscious as she spun and kicked her way through her routine. When her set ended, she gathered the scattered coins, counting them discreetly as she stepped behind the thin curtain that served as her dressing room. $4.37. It wasn't even enough for this week's boarding house payment. Mrs. Fletcher had already warned her she couldn't extend credit any further. Hope changed into her plain cotton dress, wiping the cheap rouge from her cheeks with a damp cloth. She was preparing to slip out the back door when a knock came at the frame of the curtain. "Miss Garrison." The voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as not being from California originally. Hope pulled the curtain aside cautiously. The stranger from the corner stood there, hat in his hands now. He was taller than she'd realized, broad-shouldered with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wasn't young, perhaps 35, but he had a handsome face, serious and thoughtful. "I'm Hope Garrison," she said warily. She'd learned to be cautious with men approaching her after performances. "If you're looking for company for the evening, I'm afraid you're mistaken about the nature of my employment." The man shook his head quickly. "No, madam, nothing like that. My name is Harrison Ryder. I own the R-Cross Ranch about 15 miles south of town." He cleared his throat. "I came to Hangtown to find someone who might help at my ranch. I need a housekeeper, someone who can cook decent meals and keep things in order." Hope stared at him suspiciously. "And you thought to find such a person in a saloon?" Harrison Ryder's face colored slightly. "I've been to every respectable establishment in town already. No one's willing to come out to a ranch that far from town." He met her eyes directly. "You dance well, Miss Garrison, but I can see it's not what you want to be doing. I'm offering honest work with fair pay. 3 meals a day, your own room in the house, and $20 a month." Hope's heart skipped. $20 monthly was more than she made dancing, even on good nights. Still, she hesitated. "Why would you offer such a position to someone like me? You know nothing about me." "I know you're careful with those coins and that you thanked every man who gave one, regardless of how he behaved," Harrison said quietly. "And I know that Mrs. Holloway at the general store speaks highly of you. Said you helped her organize her stockroom last month when her arthritis was acting up and wouldn't take payment for it." Hope was surprised he'd asked about her. "I can cook plain food," she said slowly, "and I keep a clean house." My father taught me to manage a household after my mother passed. That's all I require, Harrison said. I've been making do with my own cooking since my housekeeper left to care for her daughter's new baby 2 months ago. The ranch hands are threatening to quit if they have to eat another batch of my biscuits. Despite herself, Hope smiled. Are they truly that terrible? Like rocks, he admitted with a small smile of his own. Hard enough to break a tooth. My foreman Joe calls them horseshoes. Hope considered the offer. The thought of leaving the saloon, the grabbing hands and leering faces, was tempting beyond words, but she'd learned to be careful. Would there be expectations beyond housekeeping duties? She asked bluntly. Harrison's face flushed red. No, madam, nothing improper. You'd be there as my employee, nothing more. He looked away, embarrassed. I'm not that kind of man. Something in his voice convinced her he was telling the truth, or perhaps it was desperation. Either way, Hope made her decision. When would I start? I'm heading back tomorrow morning if you can be ready. Hope nodded. I'll need to settle my account at the boarding house, and I don't have much, but I'll need to pack my things. I'll come by at 8 o'clock with the wagon, Harrison said, replacing his hat. Good evening, Miss Garrison. As he turned to leave, Hope called after him. Mr. Ryder, why did you really choose me for this position? There must be other women in town who need work. Harrison paused, one hand on the doorframe. My sister used to dance too before she married. She always said it was the hardest way to earn an honest dollar. With that, he tipped his hat and disappeared into the noisy saloon. The next morning, Hope stood on the boardwalk outside Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house with her single carpet bag containing everything she owned in the world. She had paid her outstanding bill with the last of her savings, leaving her with just 73 cents to her name. If Harrison Ryder's offer proved false, she would have nothing to fall back on. But when the wagon rolled up at precisely 8 o'clock, something in the steady way Harrison handled the horses reassured her. He helped her up onto the wooden seat and secured her bag in the back among supplies he had purchased in town. As the wagon pulled away from Hangtown, Hope couldn't help looking back at the dusty streets and the Lucky Strike saloon where she had spent so many humiliating evenings. She wouldn't miss it, but she was trading a known hardship for an unknown one. The journey to the R-Cross Ranch took nearly 3 hours on rutted dirt roads. Harrison wasn't much for conversation, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. The spring countryside was beautiful, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and oak trees spreading their canopies across the rolling hills. As they traveled south, the Sierra Nevada mountains rose in the distance, still capped with snow despite the warming weather. It's beautiful out here, Hope said as they crested a hill overlooking a green valley. Harrison nodded. My father chose this land when he came out from Tennessee in '49. He didn't find gold, but he found something better: land with good water and grass for cattle. How long have you lived here? All my life, except for 4 years during the war. He didn't elaborate, and something in his expression told Hope not to ask more about those years. They came to a creek, where Harrison stopped to water the horses. As they waited, he pointed to a distant stand of oak trees. That's the northern boundary of the ranch. The house is about 2 miles beyond those trees. Soon the ranch buildings came into view, a substantial 2-story house built of pine logs and sawn lumber, a large barn, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. A corral held several horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the spring grass. As Harrison drove the wagon into the yard, a gray-haired man emerged from the barn. About time you got back, boss, he called. Cook fire's been out since yesterday, and the boys are getting restless. Joe, this is Miss Hope Garrison, Harrison said as he set the brake. She's agreed to take on the housekeeping and cooking. Joe tipped his hat. Thank the Lord. "Welcome, Miss Garrison. I'm Joe Miller, ranch foreman. Been with the Ryders since before this one was born," he said, gesturing at Harrison. Hope smiled. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Miller. Just Joe, miss. We don't stand on ceremony much out here." Harrison helped Hope down from the wagon. "Joe, can you get one of the boys to unload the supplies? I'll show Miss Garrison the house." The main house was larger than Hope had expected, with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Inside, it was simply furnished but well built, with pine floors and a massive stone fireplace dominating the main room. Though basically clean, it showed signs of needing a woman's touch. Dusty corners, unwashed dishes stacked in the kitchen sink, and a general air of neglect. "My room is upstairs at the end of the hall," Harrison explained as he showed her around. "Yours would be this one here, beside the sewing room." He opened a door to reveal a pleasant bedroom with a real bed, not just a cot, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl and a chest of drawers. A braided rug covered part of the floor, and curtains framed the window that looked out toward the distant mountains. It was the nicest room Hope had ever been offered as her own. "This is very comfortable, thank you. The bathroom is through there," Harrison continued, indicating another door. "We have a pump in the kitchen and a reservoir on the roof for the bath. It's not fancy like town houses with running water, but it's convenient enough." He showed her the rest of the house, including the kitchen with its large cast iron stove, well-stocked pantry, and sturdy wooden table where the ranch hands would eat their meals. "There are 6 hands, counting Joe, who eat here regularly," Harrison explained. "Breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, and supper at dusk. I take breakfast and supper in the dining room, but I'm often away at noon." Hope nodded, already mentally organizing how she would manage the work. "I can have dinner ready by noon today if you'll show me where everything is kept." Harrison seemed relieved. "I'd appreciate that. I need to check on a new calf that was having trouble yesterday." He hesitated, then added, "Make yourself at home, Miss Garrison. This is your house to run now." With that, he left her to settle in. Hope spent a moment looking around the kitchen, taking stock of what was available. Then she unpacked her meager belongings in her new room, changed into her work dress, tied an apron around her waist, and rolled up her sleeves. By noon, she had prepared a hearty meal of beans, bacon, and fresh biscuits, decidedly not like horseshoes. The ranch hands filed in, washing up at the pump outside before taking their places at the long table. They regarded Hope with curious but respectful glances as she served the food. "These biscuits would make angels weep, Miss Garrison," Joe declared after his first bite. "The boss sure knew what he was doing when he hired you." Hope felt a flush of pride. It had been a long time since her cooking had been appreciated. "Thank you, Joe. It's simple fare, but I'll do my best." "Simple's fine with us, madam," said one of the younger hands. "We've been eating Mr. Ryder's cooking for 2 months. Man can run a ranch better than anyone I know, but he shouldn't be allowed near a stove." The others laughed, and Hope found herself smiling. These men were different from the saloon patrons. She was used to their eyes stayed on her face when they spoke to her, and they thanked her politely for the meal. Harrison didn't come in for dinner, but Hope set aside a plate for him. Later that afternoon, as she was hanging freshly washed curtains in the main room, he returned, looking tired but satisfied. "Calf's doing fine now," he said, removing his hat as he entered. "Something smells good." "I saved you dinner," Hope replied. "It'll just take a moment to warm it." As Harrison ate at the dining table, Hope continued her work nearby, dusting shelves that clearly hadn't seen a cloth in months. "This is the best meal I've had in a long time," Harrison said after a few bites. "Thank you." "You're welcome. I found some dried apples in the pantry. I thought I might make a pie for tomorrow, if that would be all right." Harrison looked up, a flicker of something like happiness crossing his normally serious face. That would be more than all right. Apple pie was my mother's specialty. Haven't had a good one since she passed 5 years ago. Hope noticed a small photograph on the sideboard, a family portrait showing a younger Harrison with an older couple and a pretty young woman. "Is that your family?" Harrison nodded. "My parents and my sister, Clara. That was taken before she married and moved to Oregon, before the war." Hope wanted to ask more but sensed that Harrison wasn't one to talk much about personal matters. Instead, she asked about the ranch, how many cattle they ran, what crops they grew, and how long the hands had worked for him. Harrison seemed more comfortable with these topics, and by the time he finished his meal, Hope had learned quite a bit about her new home. The days fell into a pattern. Hope rose before dawn to start breakfast for the hands, then spent her mornings cleaning, baking, and preparing dinner. Afternoons were for laundry, mending, and getting supper ready. She took pride in keeping the house immaculate and ensuring that the meals were hearty and well prepared. Harrison was often gone during the day, riding out to check on the cattle or meeting with other ranchers about water rights and grazing boundaries. But he was always there for breakfast and supper, polite and appreciative of Hope's efforts, if somewhat reserved. 2 weeks after her arrival, Hope was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Expecting to see Harrison or one of the hands, she was surprised when an elegant buggy pulled by a matched pair of bay horses came into view. A fashionably dressed woman holding a parasol was driving, with a young man beside her. The woman pulled the buggy to a stop and peered at Hope with undisguised curiosity. "Hello there. You must be the new housekeeper Joe mentioned when I saw him in town." "I'm Henrietta Baldwin, Harrison's neighbor to the east." "Hope Garrison, madam," Hope replied, wiping her hands on her apron before approaching the buggy. "Mr. Ryder isn't here at the moment. He rode out to the south pasture after breakfast." Henrietta Baldwin was perhaps 40, still beautiful with her auburn hair arranged fashionably beneath a feathered hat. "Oh, I know Harrison's schedule better than he does himself," she said with a tinkling laugh. "This is my son, Thomas. We thought we'd surprise Harrison with an invitation to dinner tomorrow evening. We're having several neighbors over." Thomas Baldwin tipped his hat to Hope, his eyes lingering a moment too long on her face. He was handsome in a polished way, perhaps 25, with his mother's auburn hair and a carefully trimmed mustache. "I'll be sure to tell him when he returns," Hope promised. "Do," Mrs. Baldwin said, her eyes taking in Hope's simple dress and work-reddened hands. "And where did Harrison find you, Miss Garrison? You're certainly not from around here." Something in the woman's tone made Hope straighten her spine. "I was previously employed in Hangtown." "Indeed?" Mrs. Baldwin raised an eyebrow. "And what sort of employment would that have been?" Before Hope could answer, Thomas interjected. "Mother, we should continue on if we want to make it to the Johnsons before lunch." Mrs. Baldwin nodded, but her curious gaze remained on Hope. "Do tell Harrison we expect him at 7 tomorrow. You might also mention that Caroline Pierce will be there. She's just returned from finishing school in Boston." With that, she flicked the reins and the buggy continued down the drive, leaving Hope with an uneasy feeling. She returned to hanging the laundry, but her mind kept returning to Henrietta Baldwin's scrutiny and the mention of Caroline Pierce, delivered with such pointed emphasis. When Harrison returned for supper, Hope relayed the invitation. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Thank you for letting me know. She seemed eager that you attend," Hope ventured. "She specifically mentioned someone named Caroline Pierce would be there." Harrison sighed, setting down his fork. "Henrietta has been trying to match me with suitable young ladies for years." Caroline is her latest candidate, the daughter of a successful banker in Sacramento. I see, Hope said, oddly relieved to hear his disinterested tone. Will you go? I suppose I should. The Baldwins are important neighbors, and it's good to maintain friendly relations. He hesitated. Henrietta can be particular about social standing. I hope she wasn't unpleasant to you. Hope shook her head. Not at all. It wasn't exactly a lie. Mrs. Baldwin hadn't been openly unpleasant, just subtly condescending. Her son seemed nice. Thomas, Harrison's brow furrowed slightly. He has a reputation for being overly charming with young women. If he comes around when I'm not here, you might want to be careful. Hope was touched by his concern. I can handle myself, Mr. Ryder. I've had plenty of practice. The next evening, Hope helped Harrison get ready for the dinner party, pressing his best shirt and making sure his suit was free of dust. As she handed him his polished boots, their hands brushed briefly, sending an unexpected warmth through her fingers. "You clean up very well, Mr. Ryder," she said, trying to keep her tone light. Harrison looked uncomfortable in his formal clothes, tugging at his collar. "I'd rather be in my work clothes. Even to meet the accomplished Miss Pierce," Hope teased gently. Harrison looked at her directly then, his blue eyes serious. "Especially for that. I have no interest in Henrietta's matchmaking schemes." After he left, the house seemed unusually quiet. Hope finished her chores early and found herself at loose ends. She wandered into the small library off the main room, where shelves of books lined the walls. Harrison had told her she was welcome to read anything she wished, but until now she'd been too busy to take advantage of the offer. She selected a volume of Tennyson's poetry and settled into a comfortable chair by the window. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Hope realized she had never felt so peaceful, so at home, as she did in this moment. It was nearly midnight when she heard Harrison return. Setting aside her book, she went to the kitchen to heat some coffee, guessing he might need it after an evening of socializing. "How was your dinner?" she asked as he hung his hat on the peg by the door. Harrison looked surprised to see her still up. "Educational," he said dryly. "I learned that Caroline Pierce can play the piano, speak French, and discuss the weather in 3 different ways without actually saying anything of substance." Hope laughed, pouring the coffee into a mug. "Impressive accomplishments." Henrietta thought so. Harrison accepted the coffee gratefully. "She was quite disappointed when I left early, pleading ranch business in the morning." "Is there ranch business in the morning?" "There's always ranch business," Harrison said with a small smile. "But no, nothing that couldn't wait. I just couldn't bear another hour of Caroline's empty chatter or Henrietta's meaningful glances." Hope found herself unreasonably pleased by this confession. "Well, I saved you some apple cobbler if you're hungry." Harrison's face lit up. "That sounds far better than the fancy French dessert they served. I couldn't pronounce it, let alone enjoy it." They sat at the kitchen table while Harrison ate his cobbler and told Hope about the ridiculous formality of the dinner party. Hope found herself laughing more than she had in years. There was something about Harrison Ryder that made her feel comfortable, despite his usual reserve. As spring turned to summer, the ranch kept everyone busy. Hope added gardening to her duties, tending the vegetable patch behind the house that had been neglected since Harrison's mother died. She took pride in serving fresh vegetables with the meals and preserving the excess for winter use. She also began riding occasionally, when her chores allowed. Harrison had offered her the use of a gentle mare named Daisy, and Hope discovered she enjoyed the freedom of exploring the vast ranch on horseback. Sometimes Harrison would ride with her, showing her hidden meadows filled with wildflowers or streams teeming with trout. During these rides, Harrison gradually opened up more, telling her about his childhood on the ranch, his father's struggles to establish it, and his own dreams for its future. Hope, in turn, shared stories of her father, a schoolteacher who had moved west for his health, only to succumb to consumption anyway, leaving Hope alone in a strange town. She was careful never to mention her months dancing at the saloon, and Harrison never asked. It was as if they had silently agreed to let the past remain in the past. One hot July afternoon, Harrison suggested they ride to a swimming hole he knew. It's fed by a mountain spring, so the water stays cool even in this heat, he explained as they saddled the horses. They rode for nearly an hour, climbing into the foothills where pine trees provided welcome shade. The swimming hole was exactly as Harrison had described, a deep, clear pool beneath a small waterfall, surrounded by rocks and shaded by towering pines. "It's beautiful," Hope said, dismounting and approaching the water's edge. Harrison nodded, securing the horses. "My sister and I used to swim here as children. Our father would bring us up on hot days like this." Hope dipped her hand in the water, which was indeed deliciously cool. "I wish I could swim." "You can't swim." Harrison looked surprised. Hope shook her head. "I never learned. My father wasn't much for outdoor activities, and after he died." She trailed off, not wanting to revisit those dark days. Harrison seemed to consider something for a moment. "I could teach you if you'd like." Hope looked at him in surprise. "Here. Now, why not? We brought lunch, we have the whole afternoon, and there's no one around for miles." Seeing her hesitation, he added, "You can keep your chemise and petticoat on. They'll dry quickly in this heat." Hope felt a blush rising to her cheeks at the thought of being so undressed in Harrison's presence, but the temptation of the cool water was strong. The day was scorching, and her dress was sticking uncomfortably to her back. "Turn around," she finally said. Harrison obediently faced away while Hope removed her riding skirt and blouse, keeping on her undergarments as he'd suggested. "You can look now," she said when she was ready. When Harrison turned back, his eyes widened slightly, but he quickly composed himself, focusing on her face. "The trick is not to panic," he said, removing his own shirt and boots but keeping his trousers on. "Water will hold you up if you relax." He waded into the pool first, then extended his hand to help her in. The water was cold against Hope's heated skin, but wonderfully refreshing. Harrison was patient, showing her how to float on her back first, his strong hands supporting her until she gained confidence. "See, you're a natural," he said as she floated unassisted for the first time. Hope laughed with delight, the sound echoing off the rock walls around the pool. "It feels like flying." They spent over an hour in the water, with Harrison teaching Hope the basic movements of swimming. By the end, she could manage a rudimentary stroke that propelled her from one side of the pool to the other. Afterward, they spread a blanket in a sunny spot and laid out the lunch Hope had packed: cold chicken, biscuits, cheese, and apple tarts. Their clothes dried quickly in the summer heat as they ate and talked, more relaxed with each other than they had ever been. "Thank you for teaching me to swim," Hope said as they packed up to leave. "I never thought I'd learn at my age." Harrison smiled, one of his rare, full smiles that transformed his serious face. "You're not exactly ancient, Hope." It was the first time he had used her first name, and something in the way he said it made her heart beat faster. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with unspoken thoughts and growing feelings. Hope found herself stealing glances at Harrison's profile as he rode beside her, wondering if he felt the same inexplicable pull that she did. As summer progressed, Harrison began inviting Hope to join him in the evenings when his work was done. Sometimes they sat on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about their days. Other times, they read in the library, Harrison often reading aloud from one of his favorite books while Hope mended or knitted. The ranch hands noticed the growing closeness between their boss and the housekeeper. Joe, in particular, watched with approval. One morning, as Hope was serving breakfast, he lingered after the others had gone out to their chores. "Boss seems happier these days," he commented casually, accepting a second cup of coffee. Hope concentrated on wiping down the counter. "I'm glad." "He works very hard." Joe agreed. "Too hard, most would say. Man needs more in life than just cattle and crops." Hope glanced at him, but Joe was innocently sipping his coffee, his weathered face revealing nothing. "Mr. Ryder knows his own mind," she said finally. "That he does," Joe replied, standing to leave. "But sometimes a man needs a little nudge to see what's right in front of him." With that cryptic comment, he headed for the door. "Joe," Hope called after him. "What exactly are you suggesting?" The old foreman turned, his expression serious now. "Just that in the 20 years I've known Harrison Ryder, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when he thinks nobody's watching." After Joe left, Hope stood motionless in the kitchen, his words echoing in her mind. Was it possible that Harrison felt something for her beyond appreciation for her household management? And if he did, what then? Hope had long since admitted to herself that her feelings for her employer went far beyond gratitude or respect. Somewhere between the morning coffee and the evening conversations, she had fallen in love with the quiet, honorable rancher. But she had never allowed herself to hope that he might return those feelings. She was, after all, a former saloon dancer whom he had hired out of pity. And he was Harrison Ryder, respected rancher and a man who could have his pick of properly bred young ladies like Caroline Pierce. But Joe's words had planted a seed of hope that she couldn't quite dismiss. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness, Harrison seemed unusually pensive. "Is something troubling you?" Hope asked after several minutes of silence. Harrison hesitated, then said, "I had a letter from my sister today. She's coming for a visit next month, bringing her husband and their 2 children." "That's wonderful news," Hope said, genuinely pleased for him. "You must be excited to see them." "I am," Harrison agreed, "but it also makes me think about things I usually try not to dwell on." "What things?" Harrison was quiet for so long that Hope thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, "Family. The future. This house was built for a family, not for a solitary man and his housekeeper." Hope's heart quickened at his words. "Do you wish for a family of your own?" "Once," Harrison admitted. "Before the war, afterward." He shook his head. "I saw too much death, did things I'm not proud of. When I came back, I didn't feel I deserved that kind of happiness." Hope wanted desperately to reach out to him to take his hand, but she remained still. "The war changed many men," she said softly. "It did," Harrison agreed. "But eventually most found their way back to living, not just existing." He turned to look at her directly, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "I think I've been just existing for a very long time. Until recently." Hope held his gaze, hardly daring to breathe. "What changed? You came," Harrison said simply. "You brought life back into this house, into me." Hope felt tears prickling behind her eyes. "I was just doing my job." Harrison shook his head. "It's more than that, and we both know it." He reached out slowly and took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Hope, I don't know if I have any right to ask this, but I need to know. Could you ever see yourself staying here not as my housekeeper, but as my wife?" The directness of the question took Hope's breath away. For a moment she couldn't speak, overwhelmed by emotions too powerful to express. Harrison misinterpreted her silence. "I'm sorry," he said, withdrawing his hand. "I've overstepped. Please forget I said anything." "No." Hope reached out, catching his hand again. You haven't overstepped, I never thought you would feel that way about someone like me. Harrison's brow furrowed. Someone like you, a saloon dancer, Hope said, the words painful to speak aloud. A woman with no family, no dowry, nothing to offer but herself. Harrison's expression softened. Hope, from the moment I saw you in that saloon, I knew you were meant for better things. Not because there's anything shameful in dancing for a living, my sister did it too, as I told you, but because I could see how it was dimming your light. He squeezed her hand gently. And you're wrong about having nothing to offer. You've brought warmth and joy back to this house. Back to me. That's worth more than any dowry. Hope felt a tear slip down her cheek. Are you certain? People will talk, Mrs. Baldwin. Henrietta Baldwin can talk all she wants, Harrison interrupted with unexpected vehemence. I don't care what anyone thinks. I only care what you think, what you feel. Hope looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and deep emotion. I love you, Harrison, she whispered, saying his first name aloud for the first time. I have for a long time now. Harrison's face transformed with joy. And I love you, Hope, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Hope met him halfway, her heart soaring as their lips met in a tender, questioning kiss that quickly deepened into something more passionate. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. Is that a yes? He asked, his voice husky. Hope laughed softly. Yes, Harrison Ryder, I will be your wife. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness as they prepared both for Harrison's sister's visit and for their own wedding. They decided to marry simply, with just the local minister, the ranch hands, and a few close neighbors as witnesses. Harrison rode into Hangtown to order a proper ring from the jeweler and to arrange for the minister to come out to the ranch. Hope, meanwhile, worked on a special dress for the occasion, using fine blue fabric that Harrison insisted on ordering from Sacramento. She also prepared the guest rooms for Clara and her family, wanting everything to be perfect for their visit. The changes in Harrison were remarkable. The serious, reserved man who had hired her 5 months earlier was now quick to smile, to laugh, and to show affection. He often came up behind her as she worked in the kitchen, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to her neck or cheek. I never thought I could be this happy, he told her one evening as they sat together on the porch swing he had hung especially for her. Hope leaned against his shoulder, content. Nor did I. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and find myself back at the Lucky Strike. Harrison tightened his arm around her. Never. This is real, Hope. What we have is real. A week before Clara was due to arrive, Henrietta Baldwin's buggy once again came up the drive. Hope was in the garden harvesting vegetables for dinner when she heard it approach. Miss Garrison, Henrietta called, her tone falsely bright. Is Harrison at home? He's out checking the north fence line, Hope replied, straightening and wiping her hands on her apron. Can I help you with something, Mrs. Baldwin? Henrietta descended from the buggy, her silk dress rustling. Perhaps you can. I've heard the most interesting rumor in town. People are saying that Harrison intends to marry his housekeeper. She said the last word as if it tasted bad in her mouth. Hope lifted her chin. That's correct. We're to be married next month. Henrietta's face hardened. I thought as much. My dear, surely you realize how unsuitable such a match would be. Harrison is one of the most respected ranchers in the county. His family has been here since the gold rush, and you are. The woman he loves, Hope finished firmly. And who loves him? Love, Henrietta scoffed. How quaint. Marriage among our class is about suitable connections, shared backgrounds, and mutual advantage. What advantage does Harrison gain by marrying a woman who was dancing for coins in a saloon just months ago? Hope felt as if she'd been slapped. "How do you know about that?" Henrietta smiled thinly. "Hangtown isn't that large, Miss Garrison. People talk, especially about women of a certain reputation. I was a dancer, Mrs. Baldwin. Nothing more, perhaps," Henrietta conceded. "But do you think that distinction will matter to people like the Pierces or the Johnsons? Harrison will be socially ostracized if he goes through with this. His business dealings will suffer. Is that what you want for him?" Hope felt sick at the thought that she might harm Harrison's standing or his business. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Be sensible," Henrietta said, her voice softening to something almost kind. "If you truly love Harrison, you'll leave before you ruin his life. I'd be willing to help you get established elsewhere, San Francisco, perhaps. I have connections there." Before Hope could respond, the sound of galloping hooves made them both turn. Harrison was riding hard toward the house, his face set in a grim expression. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped striding toward them. "Henrietta," he said coldly, "what brings you here?" "Just a neighborly visit," Henrietta replied smoothly. "I was congratulating Miss Garrison on your engagement." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Somehow I doubt that." He looked at Hope, noting her pale face and troubled eyes. "What did she say to you?" Hope hesitated, reluctant to create more discord. "She told me that marrying you would ruin your reputation and your business," she finally admitted. "That your neighbors would ostracize you for marrying a former saloon dancer." Harrison's face darkened with anger. "Did she now?" He turned to Henrietta. "Let me make something perfectly clear. Who I marry is my business and no one else's. Hope will be my wife, and anyone who has a problem with that is not welcome at the R-Cross." Henrietta drew herself up indignantly. "You can't possibly be serious. Think of your family name, your position in the community." "My family name is mine to carry as I see fit," Harrison replied. "And any community that would reject a good woman because of circumstances beyond her control is not a community I care to be part of." "You'll regret this," Henrietta warned. "Both of you." "The only thing I regret," Harrison said firmly, "is that I ever considered you a friend. Good day, Henrietta." After Henrietta had driven away in high dudgeon, Harrison turned to Hope, his anger fading to concern. "Are you all right?" Hope nodded, though she still felt shaken. "I'm fine." "But Harrison, what if she's right? What if marrying me does harm your standing?" Harrison took her hands in his. "Hope, listen to me. Before you came, I had a ranch and neighbors and business associates, but I didn't have happiness or love or a real home. I'd trade all the social standing in the world for what we have together." His sincerity was unmistakable, and Hope felt her doubts melting away. "I love you so much, Harrison Ryder. And I love you, Hope Garrison, soon to be Hope Ryder." He kissed her then, a kiss of reassurance and promise that left no room for doubt. Clara's arrival the following week brought a whirlwind of activity and joy to the ranch. Harrison's sister was a vivacious woman in her early 30s, with the same blue eyes as her brother and a warm, welcoming manner. She embraced Hope immediately, declaring, "I can see why my brother fell in love with you. You've brought the light back to his eyes." Clara's husband, Daniel, was a thoughtful, good-humored man who clearly adored his wife. Their children, 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old James, quickly took to exploring every inch of the ranch under the watchful eyes of Joe and the other hands, who spoiled them shamelessly. To Hope's relief, Clara showed no concern whatsoever about her brother marrying his former housekeeper. When Hope finally worked up the courage to mention her past as a saloon dancer, Clara waved it away. "Harrison told me in his letter. I dance too, remember. It's honest work, even if some people look down on it." She squeezed Hope's hand. What matters is who you are now and how you and Harrison feel about each other, and anyone with eyes can see you're perfect for him." With Clara's help, the wedding preparations accelerated. They decided to hold the ceremony in the garden, with an arbor of late-blooming roses that Harrison and Joe constructed especially for the occasion. The day before the wedding, a surprise visitor arrived, the minister from Hangtown, a day early, accompanied by a well-dressed older woman whom Hope didn't recognize. "Miss Garrison," the minister said warmly, "I've brought someone who very much wanted to see you. This is Mrs. Eleanor Walsh from Sacramento." The elegant woman stepped forward, studying Hope's face intently. "You look so much like him," she said softly. "Like my son." Hope stared at her in confusion. "I'm sorry, madam, but I don't understand." Mrs. Walsh took a deep breath. "Your mother's name was Hannah Garrison, wasn't it? And your father was Professor Edward Garrison." Hope nodded slowly, a strange feeling building inside her. "Yes, but how did you know that?" "Because Edward Garrison was my son," Mrs. Walsh said, her voice catching. "Which makes me your grandmother." Hope felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "My grandmother, but my father said his parents were dead." Mrs. Walsh's eyes filled with tears. "We had a terrible falling out when he chose to marry your mother. She was a dance hall girl in San Francisco, and we were too proud, too concerned with appearances. We disowned him." Her voice broke. "It was the greatest mistake of my life." Harrison, who had been standing silently beside Hope, guided both women to the porch. "Perhaps we should sit down." Over tea in the parlor, Mrs. Walsh explained how she had spent years trying to find her son after her husband died, only to discover that Edward too had passed away. "I've been searching for you ever since," she told Hope. "When Reverend Michaels mentioned performing a wedding for a Miss Hope Garrison, I couldn't believe it. I had to come see for myself." Hope was overwhelmed. "All these years I thought I had no family left." Mrs. Walsh reached across to take Hope's hand. "You have me now, my dear. If you'll have me." Hope looked at the older woman's face, seeing, for the first time, her father's eyes looking back at her, and felt a sense of completeness she had never expected to find. "Of course I will." The wedding the next day was more perfect than Hope could have imagined. The garden was in full bloom, the weather was ideal, and she was surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her Clara and her family. Joe and the ranch hands, even a few neighboring ranchers who had defied Henrietta Baldwin's attempts to organize a boycott. And there was her grandmother, sitting in the front row, beaming through happy tears. But most perfect of all was Harrison, standing beneath the rose arbor, watching with love and wonder as Hope walked toward him on Joe's arm, wearing her blue dress and carrying wildflowers from the meadow where they had first begun to fall in love. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, promises to love and cherish each other through all the seasons of their lives together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed Hope with such tenderness that several of the ranch hands had to surreptitiously wipe their eyes. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with dancing on the swept earth of the yard, abundant food, and music provided by one of the hands who played a fiddle with surprising skill. As the sun set, painting the sky in the same golden hues that had illuminated Hope's dress on that fateful evening in the Lucky Strike, Harrison drew his new wife away from the festivities and into the quiet of the garden. "Happy, Mrs. Ryder?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. Hope looked up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all she felt. "More than I ever dreamed possible. It's like a fairy tale, the dancer rescued by the handsome cowboy." Harrison smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I think we rescued each other." "We did," Hope agreed, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. And now we have the rest of our lives together. The rest of our lives, Harrison repeated, a promise and a blessing all at once. 5 years later, Hope sat on the porch swing, watching Harrison teaching their 3-year-old son, Matthew, how to brush a pony in the yard. Their 1-year-old daughter, Hannah, named for Hope's mother, was asleep in her lap. Clara and her family had moved to a neighboring ranch the previous year, unable to resist being closer to Harrison and Hope after several extended visits. Mrs. Walsh Grandma Alina to the children split her time between her home in Sacramento and extended stays at the R-Cross, doting on her great-grandchildren and constantly amazed by how life had given her a second chance at family. The ranch had prospered under Harrison and Hope's joint management. Hope had proven to have a good head for business, helping Harrison expand their operations to include breeding horses as well as cattle. They had built a new, larger barn, added several more hands to the payroll, and were considering purchasing additional land to the west. Joe, now semi-retired but still very much a part of the family, came around the corner of the house, a basket of vegetables from the garden in his arms. "Mail's here," he announced, handing Hope a stack of letters, including one from that fancy theater in San Francisco. Hope smiled, recognizing the letterhead. The previous year, she had invested in a new theatrical venture in the city, drawing on her grandmother's connections and her own understanding of entertainment. The investment had proven surprisingly profitable and had the added benefit of helping other young women find respectable work in the arts. "Any other news in town?" Hope asked as Joe settled into a chair nearby, automatically reaching out to take the sleeping Hannah from her arms. "Henrietta Baldwin selling up," Joe said with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Seems Thomas finally gambled away what was left of their money. They're moving east to live with her sister." Hope felt a twinge of sympathy for the woman who had once tried to separate her from Harrison. "That's sad news." Joe agreed, though his expression suggested he didn't find it sad at all. "Pride comes before a fall, as my ma used to say." Harrison came up the steps, Matthew riding on his shoulders. "What's this about Henrietta?" Hope repeated the news as Harrison set their son down and took a seat beside her on the swing. "I'd say it serves her right," Harrison said, "but I try to set a better example for the children." He winked at Hope over Matthew's head as their son climbed into his lap. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Hope and Harrison stood on the porch watching the stars come out, just as they had done on so many nights before. "You ever think about that night at the Lucky Strike?" Harrison asked suddenly. "When I first saw you dancing?" Hope considered the question. "Sometimes. It feels like another lifetime now, like it happened to someone else." Harrison nodded. "I remember watching you and thinking how out of place you looked, like a rose blooming in a coal mine. I had only gone in for a drink after a long day in town, but seeing you there." He smiled at the memory. "I knew I had to find a way to help, even if I had no idea then where it would lead." "You saved me," Hope said simply. Harrison shook his head. "You saved yourself, Hope. You took the opportunity and made something of it. All I did was offer you a job." "You offered me respect," Hope corrected, "when I had almost forgotten what that felt like. And later, you offered me love, a family, a future." She leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength of him against her. "You gave me a home, Harrison, not just this house, but a place to belong." Harrison tightened his arms around her. "You are my home, Hope Ryder. You and our children. Everything else is just details." Hope turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the beloved lines of his face, still handsome though now marked with a few more creases at the corners of his eyes and mouth. "I love you, Cowboy." Harrison smiled, the special smile he reserved only for her. "And I love you, Dancer." Their kiss, sweet and familiar yet still filled with passion after all these years, was a promise renewed, a testament to the unexpected journey that had brought a saloon dancer and a lonely rancher together, and to the love that had transformed them both. Behind them, the lights of the R-Cross Ranch glowed warm and welcoming against the gathering darkness, a beacon of home and happiness in the vast wilderness of the West. And above, the stars continued their ancient dance across the heavens, bearing witness to the enduring power of love to heal, to transform, and to create something beautiful and lasting from the most unlikely beginnings.